friend. Welcome to Wild and Waking, a sacred space for the woman unraveling what no longer fits, remembering the truth that's always lived inside her, reclaiming her joy, her voice, her power, and rising fully, fiercely, and without apology. I'm your host, Emily Rushell, and together we'll explore what it means to live in alignment, lead with soul, and awaken a life of abundance, authenticity, and purpose. Let's begin. Hi, friends. Welcome back to Wild and Waking. Today, I am delighted to introduce you to one of my online threads. I was going to say friends, but threads is more accurate.
It's a thread. It's a strong friendship.
Literally, I feel like more than half of my guest interviews over the past year have been like, and this is my favorite person from Threads. I love it. Anyway. This has been a conversation a long time in the making. There is so much overlap in the work that Jack is doing and that this community has been talking about and caring about. Jack is a self-taught... oh my God. Jack is a self-taught regenerative farmsteader. That is a mouthful in itself. Food and homesteading educator, printmaker, writer, and founder in ACRE, which is the Agrarian Co-Learning Resiliency Exchange. Online, they share about food resiliency, leftist politics, preparedness, and life as a queer ADHD leftist in rural Vermont. Today, we are going to talk about all the things. We have already been talking for 35 minutes before we hit record. We probably should have recorded the whole thing as we went on all of the spirals and rampages, but here we are. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so for someone getting to meet you for the very first time, get a little context of who you are, where you are, and what brought you here today.
Yeah, no big deal. Just, the whole everything
life story.
The whole thing we spiraled about for 35 minutes before we hit record. I am a former a lot of things. So I am a former craft cocktail bartender. I am a former art and art history professor. I am a former learning designer for big ed tech companies like Teachable and Resilia. And currently, I am a learning designer for food and beverage and agriculture content creators and farm businesses. I also run a regenerative farmstead here in the Northeast Kingdom region of Vermont with my husband, who is a fabulous architect. And we have a lot of very personable chickens. And I also am the founder and community steward of ACRE, as you mentioned. And that's an online co-learning community for liberal and leftist gardeners, homesteaders, and farmers. And yes, it is so important that it is politically aligned for liberals and leftists for so many reasons, which I'm sure that we will get into later.
Yeah. Okay. I actually want to start there because your background, where you grew up, like your family of origin, kind of where your early career began, was not in Vermont necessarily believing and doing the things that you did. Like identity evolution is such a huge part of your story. So if you wouldn't mind kind of taking us back and through the ages of ultimately like how you got into creating the thing that you did.
Yeah, for sure. I grew up in a very conservative family in the Appalachian foothills of Northwest Georgia. To say very conservative would probably be an understatement. But it was a family that very much prided itself on, and not just the family, but the community as a whole. Just the community culture was food sovereignty, doomsday preparedness, but in that very sort of isolationist right-wing kind of way, not in the let's all have a solar punk utopia together leftist kind of way, unfortunately. And so I've been developing those skills for my whole life, but not from the paradigm that I'm developing them from now. When I was in high school, I was in ROTC. So this kind of hierarchical, militaristic, again, very right-wing coded sort of atmosphere, very Second Amendment, all of that kind of, paradigm. But I was deeply in love with the arts and being an artist. And from the time I was in literally middle school, I knew that I wanted to be an art teacher. It was all I wanted to do. I shadowed a high school art teacher for middle school career shadowing day and did eventually go on to become, a college art professor for a while. And it was fabulous, but, to everything there is a season. It was not the career I was going to stay in for the rest of my life. I've had more than one career ego death, but I think of it as not a series of disparate things that I've done, but as a thread that I'm still pulling that is bringing me full circle to creating this pattern with everything I've ever done in my life.
I love that you bring up, those threads that are interwoven, because I have been through my own identity, ego deaths in, when I left the classroom. Like, who am I if I'm not a teacher? Especially like that's such an identity career, right? Like teacher, lawyer, police officer, like whatever that looks like. But looking back on it, like it was never random. Like every piece of the journey that I've been through has uniquely prepared me for the work that I'm doing today and the person I am today and everything that is to come.
Absolutely. When I talk to some of my current clients, like learning design clients, they express like, oh, I'm in this kind of evolution of myself right now for like who I want to be as a content creator. And one thing that I consistently hear them saying is there's no version of myself before the current version that would have been ready to do X. And I really think we all need to give ourselves a little more grace when it comes to that, because I think about that every single day and in every evolution, every step of my career. Like I've been growing food and to a greater or lesser extent, teaching other people how to grow food for about a decade now. But there is no version of myself before, the version of me 2 years ago that would have been ready to do any kind of commercial farming at any scale. There's no version of myself before the version I am right now that would have been ready to launch a community like ACRE. And so I think we just have to be kinder to ourselves with those career through lines, because everything we do is connected. Even if it doesn't feel connected, the fact that you're doing it is inherently what makes it connected.
I was just having this conversation with a friend on a podcast interview yesterday. I have been through a very hard season with this pregnancy and postpartum experience. And we were talking about what it looks like to navigate the seasonality and this, conditioned expectation to always have problem solution and like, here's what's going wrong and here's how I'm going to optimize and get it out of it as fast as possible and alchemize it into the next thing. Like, and so much of the work that I have personally been doing is really like deconditioning and really like decolonizing that expectation to have to rush out of or through everything and like holding on to the tension and the trust that like everything will make sense in the timing that it's meant to, while also not allowing myself to completely drown in it in the moment.
I totally feel that. Question. I think about this a lot. Do you feel like if we didn't live in the panopticon of social media, that you would feel more comfortable like sitting with your own evolution and not feeling the need to instantly alchemize things or make something look like the best case scenario? Because I feel like the panopticon of social media has really made us feel like we have to LinkedInify our lives, like you see these LinkedIn posts that are like, I'm so thrilled to be doing X. And it's like, really, that person is fucking crushed inside, but they're performing this like inherent sense of success and evolution. Like, no, girl, could we just sit with our grief for a second and like feel our feelings instead of intellectualizing them?
I feel like that is a multi-layered answer for me because first of all, yes, especially in the nature of the work that I've created for myself, I think that there is an expectation to like show the journey and like, here's what I'm going through. And then like summarize it in like a 1 minute yapping reel of like, and here's how it's better, And so there has been a lot of like grief and releasing expectation to allow myself to just be in it and not be creating. I mean, really, if you look at my social media over the last year and a half, like it's pretty bare minimum. But also, I do believe that in the absence of social media, I would have never even had the awareness to go through the journeys that I have gone on. Like so much of my current lived experience is the culmination of the ideas that I've had access to and the relationships that I've built along the way and the questions that I've been invited to ask and like the bigness of my life and like the depth of my experience that I think without the internet in the way that I use it, I would have never known. I don't know that I can like actually separate my experience now from existing on the internet because so much of what I know now is because of being a human that exists and creates and like has this business that has really, I don't want to say pushed as enforced, but like kind of through this like deep personal evolution. I don't know. I think I would have just like continued to play the roles that I had for my whole life of like, here's what a good wife, mother, teacher, good girl, like here's the checklist. Like I had been so good at the checklist.
The checklist is a trap. And I'm 100% with you because like as you were talking, I was just like, ooh, yeah, actually, I do also feel that way. Like I have zero gratitude for the panopticon, element of existing online. And to be clear, like I don't think of myself as a content creator and certainly not as an influencer. Those people are my clients, but for me, and some people have been like, no, you are a content creator. I'm like, no, girl, that does not feel comfortable, like a comfortable label to me. But without content creators and without like existing on the internet, in part that panopticon, I think I would just be going through the checklist too. And, like I mentioned earlier, I wanted to be an art educator, from the beginning, from the way before internet days when I was in middle school. And I just kept moving through that, evolution on a preset path in a very dogged way. But then when COVID happened and some sort of like, let's call it politically motivated events happened in my academic career, there was a massive schism. And I feel like this entire cosmic shift happened in part because of that, politically motivated exit from academia and also COVID. Like COVID disrupted so much for so many people. And I was listening to the most recent episode of your podcast, and I realized like, I have heard so many people say this. COVID erased the checklist completely in good ways and in bad ways. And I feel so incredibly privileged that I was able to like take anything good, to see any silver lining from COVID. But at the same time, even though COVID and that exit from academia set me off on this like massive ego death and massive career shift that I was not seeking, was not expecting, did not want, there were some good things that came out of that. And without like living inside the internet, I think I would actually be experiencing a lot more grief because I would feel like a checklist had been erased and there was no other path to replace it with.
I would be experiencing grief without having the name for it and would be relying on the same like patterns of alcoholism that ran in my family. Or I would be clinging to rigid systems that provided answers, which I think is honestly like what we are seeing now in real time is like we have this like collective pain and this trauma and this grief from the COVID era and prior and immediately after, and nowhere to place it and very little language for it and very little permission given to the masses to like actually meet the grief and process what happened and like be able to create a life and identity on the other side of it. And so I believe that's part of the reason we are seeing like, I know you could talk for hours about like the Tradwife alt-right pipeline, but that's why there is so much attractiveness in it because there is certainty, there is definition, there is answers, there is like safety within boundaries. Even if logically you're like, I don't know if this feels good, but it feels good to not feel that pain and sadness and grief and suffering and to have an answer or a finger to point or a person to blame that's outside of like this very real, very painful internal struggle.
Yeah, it's so true. And you're absolutely right. I could talk about the Tradwife and anti-Tradwife thing like for fucking ages. It's like it consumes my every waking thought these days. But I do think it's really tied to COVID in a big way, in part because we're all at home. We were all at home and all realizing that there actually is this like deep sense of joy and meaning and purpose in the domestic sphere that does not exist in like hashtag girl boss, hashtag hustle culture life. And I'm an elder millennial. I was in high school when like the prevailing fashion was that you looked like you were about to go to be a secretary at a board meeting.
Right?
You know?
Why
Like,
were we drinking in blazers?
what
Why
the
was I
actual hell?
tramping around downtown in my college town in stilettos?
And a pencil skirt and
What?
a button-down blouse with a
We
collar.
in the middle of nowhere, Illinois.
It was such
What
a
the
psyop.
fuck?
I'm sorry. The entire existence of the clothing brand Express was a millennial psyop to marry us to corporate culture from a
Oh my
very early
God.
age. And it
That's so
worked. And it worked. So, you know,
and it worked.
it absolutely worked.
Treated, Jaeger for spreadsheets, but it's fine.
Yeah, exactly. It's fine. It's fine. This is fine. So, like, a rejection of that culture felt really, really good for a lot of us. And then the alt-right went and very successfully made it political, right? I think about like Ballerina Farm and, you know, just the entire like Tradwife alt-right pipeline. And it's like, it actually doesn't have to come as a package deal. Like, I'm about as leftist as they come. And what has never made sense to me, what has not made sense to me since COVID especially, is hearing people, especially women, say like, I want a soft life. I want to be at home. I want to raise chickens and children and bake sourdough bread and belong to a community. And also, I'm voting for the corporate oligarchy. Like, you know,
Right?
like the math doesn't math. Like,
Mhm.
if you want a life that's based on traditional values, like even before we moved to Vermont, when, you know, living and working in rural North Carolina, and or rather maybe living in Asheville and working in rural North Carolina south of Asheville, it's like I'm talking to people who are affirmed Trump voters, affirmed MAGA people, you know, and they're like, yeah, well, out here in the country, we take care of each other. Becky's barn burned down, so we're passing around a hat to help her get lumber to rebuild her barn. Bro, that is socialism. Like, what are you talking about? And so I think that what the left has to do is meet with an answer to the alt-right Tradwife pipeline to show that you can have this beautiful, domestically centered, agrarian, grow your own food even if you're not in the middle of the country, bake your sourdough bread culture without also voting for corporate oligarchy, misogyny, Christofascism, you know, and no hate to spiritual people. Like, this is going to sound so tokenizing, but like some of my best friends are Christian, and that's awesome. You can be a Jesus Christian, not a corporo techno fascist Christian. And the fact that a distinction even has to be made is astounding to me. You know, here in Vermont,
There's
it's
so
different.
much cognitive dissonance right now. And like, I am so in agreement with you. Like, so much of the work I have done over the last couple of years is that softening and that deconditioning from that hustle, from the like constant output, from the constant like excavation of myself as a good, as a, commodity. Like, so much of my life is centered around cyclical living and going on walks and prioritization of like filling my home with beauty and a shit ton of books written by women, right? And like, that seems so contradictory to like what right-wing politics actually pushes for. And so it will never stop being fascinating to me that was like a movement that was like grabbed and manipulated in order to fit a narrative that is actually incongruent.
Yeah, it's completely incongruent. And I think what hasn't happened for a lot of those women is this ego death of realizing that you actually are a commodity. You feel like you are living a self-directed life right now, but you are being capitalized upon. All of your labor, all of your hard domestic labor is being capitalized upon by a movement that actually actively seeks to disenfranchise you. You just don't realize maybe that there is actually an alternative where you can have full control of your life and also have the softness and the hard work and the purpose and the meaning and the family and the spiritual community and the social community and the safety net and that sense of identity. You know, I liken it to, I'm almost ashamed to admit this on a podcast, but here we go. I'm going to do it.
I love it.
As late as 2015, 2016, so just a decade ago, I felt very high friction when I heard the phrase white privilege. Like, it rubbed me wrong so hard because I didn't know what it meant, really. I thought I did, and that's where the friction came from. And I was just thinking, like, okay, when I worked in a production print shop in Atlanta, Georgia, this like fabulous print shop called Danger Press, and one of my coworkers was Hispanic, and we were having a conversation one day. Now, in retrospect, I can't even remember what it was about, but he was like, "Jack, I'm going to need you to check your white privilege on that." And nobody had ever said that to me before. And immediately, the way that it hit me was just like, it's like one of those scenes in Hollywood where like the camera zooms into someone's eyeball and you see the universe behind it. And I just, in a split second, I was just like, I grew up so friggin' poor. Like, my parents built this cabin with their own two hands. We had an outhouse, and I like scraped my way to be a high performing kid in high school. I got a full merit based scholarship to one of the top schools in the country. I worked so friggin' hard. Like, what privilege are you talking about? Because when you're white and you grow up poor, so many of us cling to our sense of grit and our ability to overcome odds and be the underdog and work hard and silently get through the trauma that you shouldn't be having to get through. And that's our entire fucking identity. And so when someone comes at you and says, well, check your white privilege, like, it feels like it undermines your entire sense of self if you don't fully understand what it means, right? And I think that there are a lot of white people in rural America who are voting hard for Donald Trump, who, if you had to live by my personal silly little utopian dream of you don't vote for candidates, you actually have to bubble in yes or no on issues, and you don't know which candidate represents those issues, I think that half of fucking rural America would be voting for socialism in a heartbeat, but they're not, because politics is tying their identity to a sense of quietly overcoming struggle, and the Republicans have somehow, with their soft hands, co-opted that.
100%. Oh my gosh, the number of time this has come up in my masterminds, in my group programs, this like sense of, well, this is just the way we've always done it, and work hard and like push through, and like we don't talk about our feeling, and like there is so much honor and admiration for that idea of like working yourself to the bone, right? To overcome, to be, to, and like the problematic approach that is having for agriculture as our world is evolving, it like is going to be the downfall. And it is so much identity is wrapped up in it. You are nail on the head.
So much. And in agrarian culture, the thing that really kills me is like how someone can vote for a candidate that wants to put autonomous self-driving robots into fields to harvest instead of voting for the party that wants to pay farmers a living wage and make sure that farmers have universal health care. We are currently farming with zero health insurance. And anybody who's out there listening to this who's in the same situation knows exactly how we feel right now. Like, every time we go out to like repair a fence or cut down a tree or deal with some cranky animals, like, you are putting yourself in immediate danger. And there is no way that any political party that is trying to put farmers in a position where they're doing one of the most dangerous jobs in America and they have no health insurance, you cannot say that you support farmers. I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg of them not supporting farmers. But yeah, agrarian life would be better served by policies that are not, if not democratic socialists, then at least provide more of a safety net for working rural communities. And the Republicans aren't doing that.
Mm-mm. Which is just like, in I know we have already circled around this, but like the optics of buzzwords and blame and narratives compared to actual policies that play out. Like, we are having entirely different conversations in what drives voters compared to like the reality that those votes create.
Absolutely. Like, it's vibes and aesthetic-based voting versus policy-based voting. And if it were left up to policy, again, like if somebody had to bubble in, like,
In the most simplified terms, yeah.
Do you want to be able to receive your Social Security, in 10 years from now? Yes. Hard yes. Of course I do. I've paid into it for my entire life. Well, then you did not just vote for a Republican candidate right there. It really should be that simple. But vibes-based voting is going to drive this country into the ground if we're not careful.
The question I want to ask is like, so where do we go from here? But like you and I both know there's like no answer we're going to come up with today that's like actually going to.
There's not. I mean, we would be solving the world's problems. And like, there's part of me that wants to say, Vermont, go to Vermont. Like,
Also, do you want that many neighbors?
I mean, yes and no. That's a difficult question. I mean, just thinking about like political utopianism, I'm working and have been working on this like Substack article for a couple of days now that has been just fermenting in my mind for months, if not years, called The Vermont Problem. And the Vermont problem, and I think that the YouTuber Morgan Goldshaw Farm on YouTube speaks to this pretty well. And he's made a couple of like documentaries about it on his alternative YouTube channel. He lives here in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont as well. And to me, the Vermont problem is really that the rest of the country is not like Vermont. And what I mean by that is, Greg and I came here seeking a safer, slower, more utopian, more politically aligned way of life. And to a large extent, we have found that. However, and this is kind of the first time I'm really talking about it publicly, we don't know if we can afford to stay. Our property taxes continue to go up. And just to be clear, we're not libertarians. Like, obviously, like we love to pay taxes to support the needs of our community. And also, the Vermont problem is that because the rest of the country is not like Vermont, our tax dollars are going to genocide. Our federal tax dollars. Our federal tax dollars are going to fund massive military operations. They're going to bail out banks. They're going towards crypto schemes and fucking UFC fights at the White House. If that weren't the case, that federal money would be supporting things in Vermont that would help lower our state tax dollars and our property taxes and all of those things. Like, Vermont is trying very hard to be a utopian vision of America. And to an extent, a lot of it really is, regardless of your social class, regardless of your background of any kind. But we are hamstrung as a state because the American ideals, the real American ideals that we are trying to uphold here in our brave little state, are being hamstrung by the way that things operate at the federal level. And that's the Vermont problem. It's that the rest of the country just isn't quite like Vermont. It's very expensive to be here. It is utopian, but you pay for it.
Yeah. What advice would you give someone who is, for whatever reason, existing in a space that is not Vermont? Perhaps in, your hometown or in their, middle of nowhere, and has really gone through their identity evolutions, or perhaps sees the world differently than the people in their backyard, but are very much still in community with, people who are seeing the world in different ways. What advice or encouragement would you give that listener?
That's a tough question. And it's easy for me to sit here from Vermont and say things that aren't just move like we did, right?
Right.
So I want to call out the potential hypocrisy here. The real advice that I would give is, as much as I rail against internet community, is to seek like-minded people in internet spaces and then connect with them IRL, from that as much as possible. And this is not a sales pitch. Like, I do steward an online community that
Please sales pitch.
Okay, ACRE social. So yes, ACRE, Agrarian Co-Learning and Resiliency Exchange, is very explicitly for liberal and leftist farmsteaders, homesteaders, farmers, gardeners. And we're growing to such an extent now that we have a small but mighty membership, but we have members in every area of the country now. And we're hoping to build a greater membership base for this exact reason. And In fact, this past Sunday, every Sunday we have Agrarian Book Club. It's like our little heathen church, And I mean, people who are not heathens are also welcome, of course. But, we were all talking in the group meeting, live meeting, about how one of our like low-key desires, and yes, full offense to Joel Salatin here, one of our low-key desires is to develop a conference that is like the liberal and leftist answer to the Homesteaders of America conference. I don't have beef with like, a lot of the people on the podcast or who are involved in that at all, but it is not exactly a space where somebody who looks like me, who is queer, like feels safe camping out, or something like that. And there's like a big tent revival, like a Christians only tent revival and things like that. And so the way that these things kind of evolve, what we were talking about on Sunday is like, we really need to start, we need to grow the membership base to the extent where we can start having kind of like regional meetups, even just casual things at breweries or, places where you can get non-alcoholic things to drink as well, of course. And then grow it into something where people feel comfortable meeting together on like a more national scale eventually. I love that idea. And I can't tell you how affirming it has been to exist in what is weirdly a very non-political space. Like, you see the vibe on Threads every day. I love
Oh my
Threads.
God, yeah.
I'm a hoe for Threads. Like, I really am.
Same.
But every single day, it's like you'll be in gardening threads or homesteading threads or farming threads, and you're like, just for a minute, could it not be political for a second, right? And the beauty of existing in a community that is explicitly political, the conversations that happen in ACRE are mostly apolitical conversations because we know we're all on the same page. We don't have to engage in the exhausting political discourse. We can give each other advice on how to keep this chicken alive, right? And get straight to that. And that it's a really beautiful thing. So whether people, to answer your question, long story short, if people want to join ACRE, that's amazing. If the $5 a month or $50 a year that I hate having a charge to keep it online because it costs money, if that's not attainable, then find that online community, whether it's in Threads, whether it's, in a Facebook group, whatever it is, and then turn that online community into an offline community because offline is very important. We have to rely less and less on Meta-based platforms and Google-based platforms, I think, which is part of why ACRE is built on a private platform. It doesn't belong to Meta or any company like that. It is self-owned.
Yeah. That's been a conversation that has been so real in my community as well, is like we have so much gratitude for these like very deep, intimate relationships that have been formed virtually and has been so life-giving in the season of the journeys that the women who are in it have been through. And also, like, what does it look like to be the person brave enough to start those conversations in real life? Because there are other people who are sitting there having the same thoughts and have nowhere to turn, right? A lot of the women in my community have been deconstructing from the church and are like, well, in the absence of that, where are the people? Because church serves a very specific function in a small town. And so I really do believe the next evolution of my work, and for so many who are listening, is like being the one who's like taking those conversations offline, which requires a different kind of vulnerability. But I believe that, going back to who would you be without the internet? Like, I do believe that we have gone through these journeys together to equip us to be the torchbearers, to like initiate those communities, those conversations that will ultimately drive systemic change from the inside out.
Absolutely. And I think it is upon all of us, all of our shoulders, whether you have, 50 followers or 50,000 followers or 50 million followers, that we have to be working together to build a better internet and to build an internet that supports offline conversations. And we know that the Threads algorithm is not in our favor and Facebook is not in our favor when we want to build these offline communities. If you put a link in something, like I have fewer than 10,000 followers on Threads, but I have like 2.5 million views, on average every month. And that's I think that's a pretty high ratio of, views and engagement to followers. But the second I post a link to something, crickets. Nobody sees the link for that thing. Of course, Threads wants to keep you, on Threads, but that's not good for we the people. And so I think that we have to be working together to build visibility for community alternatives and to build a better internet when we do have to stay on the internet. But agrarian life is lonely, and liberal agrarian life is especially lonely. Even here in Vermont, I mean, we have such low population density, period, right? Like the second least populated state density wise in the country, I think, maybe third now. But like finding and connecting with your people is essential for mental health, and mental health is one of the biggest scourges of rural communities, especially for people who identify as queer or who identify as liberal or leftist, because most rural communities are not. And I get a lot of flack on Threads for being quote unquote divisive by making ACRE an explicitly political space. And I don't care. Eat my shorts. Not only because it peak millennial insult.
I was going to say, that is an insult I have not heard in a moment.
It's been a hot minute. Yeah. I think it's from Hey Arnold. But like, not only is it the creation of a safe space, I'm not explicitly liberal and leftist in my community leanings IRL. And you're never going to change some stranger's mind on the internet, but you can change someone's mind in person, or at least help them to see you as a fellow human being in person. Like one of my closest neighbors is a former Republican state legislator here in Vermont.
Interesting.
Like, conservative guy, right? Now, granted, a Vermont conservative is like a moderate Democrat in the South, like for real. But like this neighbor, he's in his 70s, and he was one of the original sponsors of the bill to legalize weed, like to legalize cannabis in Vermont. We don't see eye to eye on everything, but if his lawnmower is having trouble and he needs to help push starting it or something, I'm going to go help him. Even if we have one MAGA neighbor, like even if this one MAGA neighbor, if there's a tree down over their driveway after a storm, I'm going to bust out my chainsaw and go help them cut up that tree. What I'm not going to do is give the same level of access to my time and the same vulnerability to a stranger on the internet that doesn't agree with me. And that's what ACRE is for.
Yeah, and I think that is also a wildly unpopular opinion with leftists online. I think there is, and I understand where this comes from, but there's the like, cut everyone off, sever all ties. And that is just not the reality when you live in a place like this. And I also don't believe that it is doing good for the future. And I understand why that is a take that a lot of people don't agree with and is a take that does not serve everyone. But like this community listening is like living proof that people evolve over time when conversations are built over trust and vulnerability, and when people have the room and the safety and the support to fall apart and to ask really hard questions and to be undecided and evolving and knowing. And that straight up doesn't happen when we just say, like, everyone who doesn't think, act, talk, vote, believe, love like me, like, does not have a place in my bubble of protection. Again, I get why some people have to do that, but I don't think that it is going to serve us moving forward. And I think it's a very specific take that can maybe serve you well if you live really far away from a cornfield. But I believe that the people like you and I who live in places like this, who are willing to have hard conversations and who are willing to hold that nuance, are actually doing more to like transform ideologies and challenge them on the front lines from the inside out in a way that's actually going to move more people to involvement or paying attention, or at least away from apolitical dissociation.
Absolutely. And I this is another thing I catch a lot of flack for on Threads. Like, I'm not the person who's going to come and say, well, if there's one person sitting at a table with 9 Nazis, there are actually 10 Nazis, right? Or like, like that kind of discourse. I understand where the sentiment comes from, but in rural communities, it doesn't work. That's the first thing. Second thing, if I see you online saying, we have to flip seats if we're going to take this country back, if you say that and then you say, absolutely not, I'm never talking to a MAGA voter, that person's a Nazi, how do you expect to flip seats if you don't flip votes? And how do you expect to flip votes if you don't flip hearts and minds, right? So I would never blanket statement and say that everyone has to have this approach. There are people for whom it is not safe. For people of color, it's not safe for a lot of people who look like me, who are like visibly, non-binary, or maybe they're trans and they don't feel like they're passing it or something. Like, I would never encourage anyone to do emotional labor that is unfair to them, and especially that's unsafe to them. As for myself, I choose to do it, because I feel, especially coming from a very conservative background, I feel equipped to do it. I'm an apostate, like, there's nothing more powerful to a quote unquote enemy than an apostate. You understand how they think, how they feel, why they believe what they believe. It should be upon us, apostates, so to speak, I think, for myself anyway, to go out and do that work. Because if we're not doing the work, then there's not going to be any change. And so I'm happy to put myself on the line to go out there and be the one who does it. And I have de-radicalized several people. I don't talk about it a lot online, but like, I have helped develop international training that supports people to de-radicalize other people. And sometimes parents call me with, I think my kid is getting wrapped up in X, Y, or Z. Can you help them? What do I say to them? And I'm happy to do that work, because if we don't do that work, we might as well just keep flushing the toilet of America, because we're going down the shitter if we cannot turn this around.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yes, yes, yes.
Yes. If we had a glass of wine, we could go on for like 5 more hours.
We could go on for 5 more hours regardless, but unfortunately,
I know.
Podcast listenership tends to fall off around 40 minutes. I don't know why. We're fascinating.
I could listen to us for ages. Yes.
No, I have so much admiration for what you're doing and the way that you do it. And truly, like, in a season of my life where, like, I was going through my own version of, like, how do I fit into this, like, ag world in which I have built so much of my livelihood and community, but I have evolved so much. Like, what does that look like? It has been incredibly refreshing to find other people who are existing in that space and are committed to it on both sides, because there aren't a lot. And so I feel like we got connected at a time that was really helpful and important for me. So even though you get to live in Vermont with like mountains and beautiful falls,
it's amazing. Yeah. And just what one kind of parting thing, like, if I could offer the advice to anybody who's listening that I wish somebody had offered to me in this kind of like evolutionary period as an agrarian person, if you're wondering what the direction of your life looks like as somebody who's engaged with agriculture, ask yourself how you would fill in this blank. Agriculture and blank. Like, what's the synthesis? Like, what is the lens that you bring to the world that you can layer alongside agriculture to help you kind of find that path and purpose? And for me, it was agriculture and education. And that has been such a guiding light for me. And it helps me to just like reframe everything I'm doing to see the purpose in every single thing I do.
mm-hmm. So often there's this discourse online, especially among agricultural producers, of like, I want to connect with consumers. How do I get them to trust me? How do I blah, 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 blah. And it's like, well, like, you have to be willing to be a human and have the conversations and have hard conversations and go look at the world outside of your backyard and understand where other people are coming from and go through your messy evolution of like changing the way that you have always operated, and bring the humanity and all of the pieces that make you through the work that you're doing to like really shape and transform the future and the perception and viability of what this industry looks like.
Absolutely.
Look at you out here just changing the world. All right. Okay, you have talked about ACRE a little bit. Any words left unsaid about that? And also, you're on the precipice of launching a podcast.
That's correct.
Tell us more.
So yeah, any kind of last notes about ACRE, if you're a liberal or leftist gardener or farmer or homesteader, and that $5 per month or $50 per year threshold, works for you, that would be amazing. I'm going to provide a link, or rather like a coupon code that will let any of your listeners get 20% off an annual membership. So 20% off of that $50 membership. And we have a growing resource library that includes like everything from like, here's how to build a bat house for your garden, to here's a super fancy template for keeping track of the P&L statement on the eggs that your chickens lay, things like that. And we have Agrarian Book Club, and there's just a 24/7 chat that's going on for people helping each other. It's amazing. Later this fall, I am launching Untrad, which is like basically the anti-Tradwife, anti-Tradlife podcast. And it will include like the stories and political discussions of people who are members of the ACRE community, and then also folks that I've met, like you, on Threads. Probably half the people will be like, this is my best friend from Threads. So fabulous. Thank you, Threads. And so, yes, stay tuned for more on Untrad. And finally, like after months and months of work, because a lot of people listening will know how much work this is, I'm finally relaunching my website after much
I hate websites.
Fucking hate building websites so
I
much.
hate it so much.
My intent is to have it online next week. So like
wow.
July 14th, 15th,
I'm so proud of you.
I think it's been a long time in the works. And I think anybody who's listening will totally understand this. It's like, oh, I'm finally bringing together all the through lines of my life under one cohesive sort of quote unquote brand umbrella. And I'm just, instead of trying to like make up a brand, I'm using my name for the first time. And so it'll just be Ms. Jack Thomas, M-I-Z, MsJackThomas.com. And there will be an educational blog that will have like homesteading tips and tips for starting to do commercial activity when you want to go to farmsteading from homesteading. There'll be some like cocktail recipes, definitely tons of political rants. The Untrad podcast will be hosted there, and people will be able to find out about the learning design services that I offer for folks who are homesteading and farming content creators and gardening content creators too.
So cool. Okay, before we close out, what does growth mean to you in this season? Or what does growth look like for you in this season?
That's a great question. I think that in this season, growth for me looks like being open to small ego death if it's the right thing, and to make sure that I keep myself decalcified. I never want to become so calcified in my ideals that I can't admit to myself, much less other people, that I've made a wrong decision, that I have made a wrong endorsement, that I have, chosen the left-hand path when I should have taken the middle path or something like that. I think that not getting calcified as we age, and especially as we're trying to find the ultimate purpose, and path for our lives, is so important. Don't get calcified. You can't grow if you can't move.
Ooh, there's the quote.
Yes.
I also think right now, because we have brought up politics so much, I think it is, I've seen reels that are like, hold space for both your rage and your whimsy. And I think that we have to. Like, it right now is so easy to get so defeated, especially as you've gone through this like excavation and evolution. Like, there's so much anger and sacred rage and this grief that can feel so consuming. And a part of the journey is learning how to feel that and experience it and not dissociate from it. But I also believe the work is not to drown in it, because that serves absolutely no one and does not drive any movement forward. And so I know you are an artist. And so whatever that looks like for those listening, like, what does it look like to create and to live in color and the whimsy and the joy? Like, both are so necessary to not only feel healthy and whole and healed or healing, but also to inspire and to continue advocating for what you believe in.
Absolutely. I've been feeling extra angry for the past couple of weeks. And so I decided, and I don't know, not everyone who is listening to this will also be able to see it, right? But I'm working on this tiny little copper plate etching of a miniature tomato. It has no conceptual purpose for any kind of higher art form. It's just like, I just want to make a tiny little etching of a tomato because it's cute and it makes me happy. And you can do that while also wrapping your fists and putting on your gas mask and preparing to go to a protest against ICE. And actually not doing both of those things does serve someone. It serves the bad guys. Like, if you do not hold on to your whimsy, what the fuck is the point?
Yeah. Yeah. If we're not creating the world we want to live in, then we're just as angry as anyone else.
Exactly. It makes us too close to being them.
Mm-hmm. More tiny tomato drawings and tiny tomatoes.
And tiny tomatoes. Yeah, they're popping up right now.
I love it. I love it. Well, I actually don't love tomatoes other than when they're in like pico and salsa and, my pasta and stuff. But thank you so much for joining
thanks
us.
For having me.
Anyone that's listening, if any part of this conversation sparks something in you, please don't hesitate to reach out to either one of us. I know I personally really love continuing the conversations beyond the mic. It makes it feel less like just speaking into the void, although this has been so fulfilling. But I'm just so grateful for each and every one of you, of us, to be able to sit in this conversation and use it to do the good in the world. Thank you. Hey friend, I hope this conversation sparked something real in you, something that feels like truth, curiosity, or the courage to keep becoming. If this episode resonated, I'd love for you to share it. Take a screenshot, post it to your stories, or send it to one of your friends. You can always find me over on Instagram at Emily Rushel, where I love continuing these conversations and hearing your takeaways. Truly, your DMs are one of my favorite parts of podcasting, so don't be shy. I'd love to reflect and connect with you over there. I'm so grateful to be surrounded by a community of women who ask hard questions, sit in the discomfort of the unknown, blaze new paths forward, and ultimately come home to their wild and waking selves. See you next week.